William T. Riker was, let's be blunt, a bit of a sex symbol in Star Trek The Next Generation. His grin, his voice, and that wonderful, wonderful beard all set the tone for what could well have been Jim Kirk 2.0. That said, we didn't always perceive Riker at his most trombone. The first season, being a test for so many of the characters, offered a different, stricter version of the man. As the show would go on, his disciplinarian side would rear its head again and again, though this tends to fade into the background whenever he breaks into that big old smile. What's that? Will's cooking breakfast? Oh, that's so cute! What's that? Will's brought a deadly game that could see the end of the Federation as we know it on board? Oh, that's so cute! Yes, the smiling Alaskan isn't always the brightest star in the fleet. William, go to your room. You've been a bad boy, and we're here to list why. I'm Sean Ferrick for TrekCulture, and here are the 10 worst things William T. Riker has ever done. Number 10. Not assuming command at the neutral zone. In All Good Things, there's a rather sudden return of the simmering feelings that Riker has for Troi. While she and Worf have begun a relationship, Riker is clearly bothered by this. Normally, personal matters would hardly be an issue on the bridge of a starship, except for the hundreds of exceptions to that rule, of course, but this one is particularly egregious. Picard clearly explains to Riker on the bridge that his time shifting often leads to a moment or two of disorientation. Should that occur, he presses, Riker must assume command immediately so as to keep the ship safe. Lost in his own thoughts, though still listening, Riker doesn't react to his words, but assures him a moment later that he will follow this order. Cut to barely minutes later when he fails to do so. Picard, returning from a point in the past, turns to find himself eye to eye with Tomalak, who angrily asks him how long they intend to stare at each other across the neutral zone. If we allow for the rapid nature of Picard's time shifting, there must surely have been a moment or two when he seemed to freeze. Why didn't Riker follow orders, as he had assured his captain he would? This may seem a harsh review, but the Romulans were by no means Starfleet's ally at this point. Riker's inaction may well have led to a combat situation, one thankfully avoided by Picard's quick thinking. Number 9. Going full God mode. During the events of Encounter at Farpoint, Riker impressed Q so much that the latter offered him all the powers of a god. That, in all honesty, is more of a positive thing than a negative. Riker really was quite cool, so we agree with Q here. It is, unfortunately, what happens afterwards that lands this point here. Riker could generally be trusted to show good judgment. Perhaps don't look too closely at some of the entries on this list. Everyone has bad days. But it is what he chooses not to do that raises the red flag. As his realization of his new powers grows, so does his arrogance. Hidden Q is not the best episode to showcase Riker's range, but it offers a new take on an old saying: absolute power corrupts absolutely. Picard, perhaps hearing this phrase repeatedly in his mind, orders Riker not to use these powers, and Riker obeys until after the nick of time. Knowing that Riker could have saved a young girl's life, but rigidly decided to obey orders, only to later offer his friends gifts instead, is a very odd moment in his character growth. On the one hand, he obeyed orders. On the other, the powers of the Q are timeless. Once he had decided that enough was enough, it would have been a simple matter to change that young girl's destiny. To be clear, he is not responsible for her death, though he is charged with having the power to change it and choosing not to. Number 8. Completely forgetting the existence of his daughter. Now, out of universe, there's a very good reason for this one. Edits and budgets, just to make that clear from the beginning. Honestly, we don't want to paint too bad a picture of this man. Nepenthe introduced us to Kestra Riker, the daughter of Will and Deanna Troi. She is an immediately likable young woman, confident, funny, and a wonderful friend to Soji. She even manages to help Picard find a way to identify the planet from Soji's dreams, displaying her quick thinking and ingenuity. She is name-dropped in the 3rd season of Picard, but alas, she does not appear. That, unfortunately, leaves her father in a bit of a forgetful position. As he stands on the bridge of the Enterprise D in Vox, he assures Geordi, Beverly, and Jean-Luc that Sydney, Alandra, and Jack will not be abandoned to the Borg, as they are family. What of Kestra? In the next episode, and indeed earlier in that season, much time had been devoted to discussing Thad, Kestra's brother, but not so much Kestra herself. It was an odd moment to forget his daughter, having just watched hundreds of young people succumb to the collective. There is certainly hunger for the story of a ground war on Earth, with Kestra and Elnor leading the unaffected cadets against the rest of the Borg. Hopefully, that will be memorable enough. Number 7. Bringing a potential alien invasion to the Enterprise. William T. Riker is a bit of a special case when it comes to what is and isn't allowed in Starfleet. Consider, Harry Kim was given a full dressing down by his captain for daring to snog a member of an alien race. Riker swanned off to Risa, met up with a beautiful Qatarian woman, and almost delivered Starfleet into their nefarious schemes. Not even a slap on the wrist. One would assume that there's at least a checklist before officers are given shore leave. Don't bring back potentially harmful alien technology would be at the top of that list, or at least somewhere around the top 3. Riker, on the other hand, after losing Starfleet technology by having his comm badge chucked out the window, proceeds to yell, "Okay then," when offered the eponymous game to play, settling in for an evening of endorphin blooming and starship dooming. Honestly, if it weren't for Wesley and Robin Leffler, Riker's libido could have handed control of the Federation over to the Qatarians, and they don't particularly seem like the folks who are happy to live and let live. Number 6. Attempting to break the Prime Directive to rescue Saran. This is one of the sadder entries on this list, and one that would seem the most easy to forgive. Riker, acting both from a place of love and care, attempts to stop the Janai from forcing Saran to undergo their re-education program. His first attempt is by far the more proper in terms of Starfleet. Though he barges into a closed hearing, he offers himself up for discipline, claiming that he was the one who forced Saran to believe she was, in fact, female, rather than the androgynous norm experienced by many of her species. She passionately tells her truth, which absolves him, though places her in direct jeopardy of being fixed. His second attempt, loath as we are to say it, is a far worse judgment call, despite his best intentions. He, along with Worf, travels down to the planet to effectively kidnap Saran to bring her to safety. Not only is this against every regulation in the book, but it directly threatens diplomatic relations with the entire planet. The ending is a tragic one. Saran has already been processed, thus removing any need for Riker's rescue. Again, loath as we are to admit it, from a diplomatic view, Starfleet would probably have been far less impressed with Riker had he managed to retrieve her. The outcast remains a moral quandary to this day. Did Riker do the right thing? It is ultimately for the individual to decide, as Starfleet never quite seemed to mention it again, and it didn't seem to affect his career. Number 5. Shaving his beard. The first season of The Next Generation introduced us to a version of Riker that was clean-shaved and more than a little uptight. As the second season dawned, a new man stepped onto the bridge, complete with a tidy beard and a new attitude. This would be the Riker we would come to know and love over the following decade or so, helping us grow more and more comfortable with the affable bloke. Star Trek Insurrection offered a fresh hell for us to consider. In a scene with more bubbles than the director's edition of The Hunt for Red October, Riker slathers shaving cream on himself and destroys the hearts of fans everywhere. Smooth as an android's bottom, eh, Data? No, Will, this isn't a laughing matter. There are so many different threats taking place all around the crew, and you offered up one of the most distracting, upsetting things in the history of the franchise. It is not a suggestion that Jonathan Frakes is any less visually appealing than usual, but rather an unwelcome reminder that there are alternate universes out there with no facial hair at a time where no distractions are needed. Let us never repeat this again. Number 4. Throwing Jean-Luc off the bridge. The third season of Star Trek Picard brought our old favourites back together again for one last ride. The USS Titan A, the upgrade and refit of Riker's own Titan, serves as the base for much of the season's action, including the events of 17 Seconds. It is here, with Riker put in temporary command by an incapacitated Captain Shaw, that offers up this entry. Pursued by the Shrike, the Titan A is at a disadvantage, though one could argue the combined experience of both Picard and Riker should make things a lot more comfortable for the crew. Alas, no. The two men openly argue on the bridge. Picard pushes to engage the Shrike while Riker elects to try and evade. This leads to a standoff where, finally, Riker capitulates, only for the Shrike to land a crippling blow. Rather than act in the expected manner a captain should, Riker turns to Picard and coldly accuses his former commander of killing them all, before ordering him off the bridge. Though they quickly reconcile, this is an extremely out-of-character moment for the former first officer, with the blame directed at the wrong individual, effectively kicking the man while he's down. It was a moment of the man cracking under pressure, so we can forgive a little, just don't do it again. Number 3. The Whole Coverup fiasco. Riker did his best to excel at Starfleet Academy, working harder and eventually graduating as 8th in his class. Fresh-faced and ready to impress, Ensign Babyface was posted aboard the USS Pegasus and quickly had his illusions about service in Starfleet shattered. We will not hold him responsible for Eric Pressman's actions. It was hardly Riker's fault that the then captain chose to break the Treaty of Algeron, nor even will we find particular fault with Riker grabbing the phaser and defending his captain as they ran toward the shuttle bay. There are things like loyalty and service that are baked into the brains of every cadet in Starfleet, but Coverup raises a red flag wherever one hears it. The surviving officers of the Pegasus deliberately set out to falsify exactly what happened aboard the ship, and Riker, naive as he was, certainly participated in that. This, however, is an entry where we can both call out the man for his earlier actions, but praise him for his later actions. Time to reflect is a wonderful thing, and when faced with a similar choice again, Riker elects to tell his captain the truth about what happened. We can even forgive his hesitancy, as this all stems from a very dark period in his career. The less said about trying to find himself on the NX-01, the better, though. Number 2. Going out of his way to make Shelby's job harder. Elizabeth Shelby arrived on the Enterprise as a determined, ambitious lieutenant commander in the best of both worlds, having been a crucial part of the anti-Borg efforts for almost a year at that point. Riker, having just turned down his third command, found himself facing someone who aggressively wanted his job. It rattled him, to be fair. There was a long-running debate in Trek circles about Riker's actions towards her. While she is undeniably brash and often displays overconfidence, he certainly doesn't do anything to make her life any easier when she arrives on the ship. Though she oversteps at times, she's also clearly faced with an officer who doesn't, openly at least, take her seriously. What truly heightens these issues is the utter urgency of the piece, an aspect of their relationship that only deepens with the assimilation of Picard. It takes him a while, but Riker does begin to recognise that there are aspects of her that remind him of himself, and he feels threatened by that. Though his command of the Enterprise ultimately helps to save Starfleet, his welcome for Shelby left a lot to be desired. This is something he clearly hadn't forgotten by the events of Vox, as there is a definite frost in his voice when he sees her again. Number 1, running away from Deanna and Kestra. This is an entry that is a little sadder to consider, especially when one sees Riker and Troi as a whole. Their relationship had been established in Encounter at Farpoint, even if it would take years for it to truly solidify. While aboard the Shrike, he does also wonder if his reunion with Deanna might result in Kestra losing the rest of her family, and it is to this that we turn. In the time that followed their son Thad's death, Deanna numbed Will's grieving process with the help of her betazoid abilities. This, unbeknownst to her, sparked bitterness in him that began to grow. It was very much present when Picard and Soji dropped by, but remained unsaid. It wasn't until Picard called for help that it truly became apparent. As Deanna puts it succinctly, Will ran away from his family at the first call from Picard. He doesn't deny it either. Though this does earn an entry on this list, there is also a positive outcome. The trials and near-death experiences that Riker endures aboard the Titan A help to reawaken his passion for his family. Knowing that he could lose them at any moment forces him to consider how that would feel, his resentment toward Deanna's actions aside. It is perhaps a classic failing of a family man. It is often easier to run from one's problems than to deal with them head on, even if it does sort of undermine including his actions here, as this entry. That's everything for our list today, folks. What did you think? Were we a bit harsh? Were we perhaps not harsh enough? Let us know in the comments below. And if you like these lists about worst things, let us know if there's anyone you want us to take a magnifying glass to. You remember you can follow us over on the various socials at TrekCulture or at TrekCultureYT. I'm at Sean Ferrick. You can find us as well. You're awesome. You are wonderful. Make sure that you live long and prosper. I will talk to you soon, my friends. Thanks very much.